A number of years ago, a friend called me to say he was running for Congress. I replied, "That's great. Now you're going to learn a whole new definition of the word dirty." 6 months later, he called again and exclaimed, "Brad, you wouldn't believe how dirty this race is." I just kind of quietly smiled on the other end of the phone line. I think he'd forgotten I had told him he was going to learn a whole new definition of the word dirty. Now, most Americans don't really understand how ruthless politics can be, even those Christians who say politics is dirty. So, folks, I understand why some followers of Jesus don't bother to show up on Election Day. Politics is dirty. But in part, that's our fault for not showing up and holding politicians accountable at the polls. You see, ambitious politicians driven by these massive egos, they routinely personify survival of the fittest, don't they? And it's not pretty. However, as I explained in my podcast a few weeks ago, if you are a follower of Jesus, you are a steward of the one vote God gave you. And if you are a steward, then according to Jesus' parable of the talents in Matthew 25, you can either invest your vote or you can bury it. If you invest it, I hope you will try to invest it wisely as a faithful steward. In light of that, may I give you a few practical tips on how to wisely invest your vote? This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue, including voting. Now, although I hope you will never vote for a candidate who champions mass abortion or who doesn't unapologetically defend religious freedom, the following tips are not intended to tell you who to vote for. My goal is simply to help you invest your God-given vote as wisely as possible. So, how do you decide who to vote for or who to vote against? I mean, think about it for a moment. Is it their style, their personality, what they say, how they say it? Do they seem trustworthy? Maybe fear drives you. Maybe they claim to be a Christian. Maybe they're a member of a political party you tend to agree with. You see, many factors influence how we vote. But I hope you always vote with your Bible open. See, always ask, what does God say in the Bible that might impact this issue or candidate? You see, considering how God feels, not how you feel, is always the most important factor in voting as a faithful steward. You see, elections are a billion-dollar industry with a lot at stake. Candidates pay dearly for marketing consultants who understand how to manipulate you, how to trick you, scare you, woo you, and capture your imagination. They also hire skilled coaches to help them package and deliver their public speeches. And some candidates, folks, they are such persuasive orators that they could probably fool their own mothers. Now, my mother was in the Oval Office with President Clinton on the National Day of Prayer in the 1990s. I don't remember which year. She did not vote for him. She did not trust him. However, she said the man was so charming that had she not been absolutely certain of the person she was talking to, she would have been taken in within the first 5 minutes. Now, I personally know leading pastors who were fooled by him, who later publicly admitted they had been duped. Now, during my days on Capitol Hill, I knew a Republican congressman who was highly respected and widely known to be a strong evangelical in his home district. He was tall, handsome, extremely smart, well-spoken, and he knew all the evangelical lingo. However, in Capitol Hill, we all knew him to be a self-serving liar. His mouth advertised one thing, but his actions demonstrated the opposite. My point is, never trust the packaging or a silver tongue. It's like Saruman in The Lord of the Rings. If you listen to him very long, he could manipulate you with his voice. The best defense was to just not listen. It reminds me of the well-known joke in political circles. How do you know when a politician is lying? The answer is, his lips are moving. Now, that's not always true. I've known some very godly, honest politicians over the years. However, it is true far too often. So if you can't trust a candidate's words, how do you decide? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share some tips that can help inoculate you to the siren's call if you will take them to heart. So let's begin. I'm going to talk about 6 criteria for how to vote. And first one is integrity. Look closely at their integrity. Do their words and actions match? If they don't, ignore their words and focus only on their actions. In other words, turn off the sound, folks. As the old adage goes, actions speak louder than words, and nowhere is this truer than in politics. Now, closely related to that is, do their words and their votes match? If they don't, Discount their words and focus solely on their voting record. But be careful. They can even fool you with how they say they voted. Now, during my days on Capitol Hill in the 80s, I remember one congressman who went back to his home district in Georgia. He told a group of conservatives he voted for Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, known as SDI. Then he went and told a group of liberals he voted against funding SDI. Both were true. He had voted for the initial bill, then he voted against funding it. Pretty shrewd, huh? So you need to ask not just how they voted on the issue, but how they voted on funding the issue. Often those are two separate votes. See, understanding details like this will help you be shrewd as a snake as Jesus commanded. And finally, though, do their words today match their words from yesterday? With the modern 24/7 news cycle, if a candidate says one thing today but said the opposite last year, it'll probably make the evening news. However, it is important to go back and look at the original context of the statement because many reporters these days are just as corrupt as the politicians they cover. They intentionally quote politicians out of context if they don't like them, in order to make them look bad, and sometimes they just plain make things up. As Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Now, second, their track record. Look closely at their track record. You see, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Now, we know people can change, but it's wise to keep this saying in mind when a candidate's track record and their words diverge, unless you can clearly identify why the candidate changed. Go with their track record. You'll be right 9 times out of 10. And remember, never underestimate the ability of a skilled politician to mislead you with their words. Third, who are their friends and associates? Remember the proverb your mother taught you, you can judge a man by the company he keeps, and the other version is, birds of a feather flock together? There's a lot of practical wisdom in those sayings, but there's another component to this concept that is just important. Who do they hire? In politics, there is a widely accepted truism. Personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. What that means is no matter what a politician says, the person the candidate chooses to implement the policy is the one who will determine what actually happens. So whenever possible, look as carefully at the track record of the candidate's chief of staff and key staffers as you do the candidate. Now, Google usually makes that pretty easy, but not always. Now, fourth, money. Money runs politics. As the saying goes, follow the money. Forget the candidate's rhetoric and ask, who gave money to the candidate? Who were their biggest donors and fundraisers? Again, you can usually easily Google that information. That will tell you how the candidate is most likely to vote. But also ask, who has the candidate given money to in the past? Who has given money to their PAC if they have one? And who payrolls their kids, siblings, and their wife? Follow the money. OpenTheBooks.com can be very helpful. They track earmarks, third parties who fund congressional junkets, pork spending, and many other revealing financial clues. Now, fifth, endorsements. Who has endorsed the candidate? What groups have endorsed the candidate? And don't forget this, who has the candidate endorsed? See, endorsements are a huge clue as to how the candidate will vote after he or she is elected. When I say huge, I mean, it's a flashing neon sign. Sixth and lastly, the job description. Now, this is one piece of advice that is often overlooked. What is the job description of the position the candidate is running for? It should factor into how you vote. For instance, what is the job description of a United States Congressman? It's to pass laws and spend your money, right? So vote based on how you think they will spend your money, as well as the laws and causes you think they are likely to support or oppose. Likewise, what is the job description of a United States Senator? It's a little different. Like Congress, it's to pass laws and spend your money. However, they also confirm cabinet members and they confirm federal judges. This last responsibility makes a huge difference that radically changes how you should evaluate them. Let me ask you, what is the most powerful branch of the federal government today? Is it the legislative, executive, or judiciary? It's the judiciary. Now, in theory, the three branches are supposed to serve as checks and balances against each other, right? However, in modern practice, the balance of power between the three branches of government is no longer balanced. The federal courts routinely tell the Congress and the president what they can and cannot do. So remember, when you vote for a United States Senator, you are also voting for federal justices, including the Supreme Court. You're voting for who will control your destiny and the destiny of this nation. So vote accordingly. Now then, finally, what is the job description of the President of the United States? The President wears a lot of hats in our government, but one of them is to nominate justices to the federal court. And since, as we discussed, the federal courts are the most powerful branch of government, that is, they can tell the President no and he must obey, make sure you take that into account. Now, finally, let me mention one area that stymies a lot of people: state judges. Have you ever struggled to figure out how to vote for judges on the ballot? I know I have. Now, let me give you a few simple ways to evaluate judges depending upon which system your state uses. 9 times out of 10, it will help you quickly figure out how to vote. In most states, judges are usually initially appointed by the governor or legislature, and then they stand for re-election by the voters in retention elections. But since the courts have become so extremely politicized, you should probably vote for each judge based on whether you tend to agree or disagree with the views of the person or the body that initially appointed them. Look up the year they are appointed and either who was governor at the time or which party controlled the state legislature, depending upon what state you live in. If the judge was appointed by a Republican, the judicial nominee is really more likely to interpret law in light of the original intent of the Constitution of that state. If the judge was appointed by a Democrat, the judicial candidate is more likely to interpret the law in light of how they view the current cultural norms. In other words, this latter group is far more likely to legislate their views from the bench. Now, in states that have partisan elections, it's pretty easy to figure out in general terms where each judge stands ideologically based on party affiliation. But in states that have nonpartisan elections, find out what individuals or ideological groups have contributed to their campaigns or endorsed them, and also consider who did not endorse them. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I don't have time to apply all these criteria to every candidate I have to vote for. Unless you're retired or you're a political analyst, you are right. So here's my best advice. Ask 5 to 10 like-minded friends to join with you. Your church would probably be a great place to find such people. Each person can take 1 or 2 candidates and thoroughly research them and prepare a written review. Then send it out to every member of your group. And then finally, find a time for everyone to get together to talk about each candidate and to ask questions. Now you can vote wisely without having to do all the work yourself. I strongly recommend, by the way, iVoter Guide as a resource to help you evaluate candidates. They apply the exact same grid to every candidate, so it gives you a great comparative analysis. And unlike most candidate rating systems, they do not weight votes in order to manipulate their ratings. Folks, as long as iVoterGuide.com continues to work hard to use the exact same grid for every candidate, I will continue recommending them. If they ever stop, I'll let you know. Now, here's the bottom line when investing your one God-given vote as a steward. Never ask, how does this make me feel? Instead, always ask, how do I think this makes God feel? And to do that, you got to vote with your Bible open. Let me leave you with the words of my sister-in-law that she often uttered whenever her kids walked out the front door. Make wise choices. God is the issue in every issue, including how you invest your God-given vote as a faithful steward. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. And if you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I publish a new podcast. God bless. And may God give you the wisdom to be a wise and faithful steward of the one vote He gave you.